Aloha and welcome to this practice WOD called 5 Problems Every Software Engineer Should Be Able to Solve. So given that you guys are all software engineers, you need to be able to solve these things. I think it's kind of cool to just take a look at this blog post and read through just to see what the deal is, because you might go to an interview and the interviewer might have looked at this blog post and said, okay, well, I'm going to test you on these things that this other guy thinks was reasonable. However, doing all 5 problems is kind of a lot for a single practice WOD, because we want these things to be able to be things you can repeat and do over and over. So we're just going to do the very first problem for this practice WOD. And that involves doing a sum of numbers a few different ways, and we're actually going to have a little bonus way using underscore. He just wants you to try to use a for loop, while loop, recursion, and we'll add an underscore because that's actually the best way to solve this particular problem if you run across needing to sum up some numbers in practice, which is a pretty common thing to have to do. All right, so let's get right into it. We want to start the timer. And then we want to create an empty GitHub repo called sum of numbers and clone it to our local computer. So let's go to GitHub and let's go to repositories, and I'll say new, and I'll say sum of numbers, and I'll make it public, and I'll initialize with a readme so that I can immediately clone it, and I'll say create repo. That gives me my repo, and then I need to clone or download, so I'll say clone or download, and that will open it in GitHub Desktop. And the local path, once again, needs to not have any spaces in it, and I like to take my home directory, create a subdirectory called GitHub, and then even further have a subdirectory inside there for the name of the GitHub organization or account that this repo is a part of, because I'm a part of multiple organizations. But at least have a directory called GitHub and put the thing in there. So I'll say sure, that's fine. And now I've got the, I've cloned it. So let's go back here and see what I'm supposed to do. README file. Okay, then create an IntelliJ static web project called sum of numbers. And so we'll go to IntelliJ, we'll say create new project, we'll say static web, we'll look around here to see sum of numbers inside this Philip M. Johnson GitHub, we'll say open, finish, and then we've got our sum of numbers right here. Cool. All right. It didn't ask me to create a git ignore file, but you could do that if you want. Now we want to use the JavaScript coding standards, so we want to make sure in Preferences, Editor, Code Style, we've got the ICS code style. So in Preferences, Editor, Code Style, yep, that's selected. Okay, that's good. What else do we need to do? Disable IntelliJ JavaScript inspections, which is by going to Preferences, Editor, Inspections, JavaScript. So Preferences, Editor, Inspections, JavaScript. So we click this until it's completely off. And then we say OK. And then we enable ESLint by going to Preferences, Languages, and Frameworks, JavaScript, Code Quality Tools, ESLint. Let's see if I can remember that. Preferences, languages and frameworks, code, JavaScript, code quality tools, ESLint, and then we're going to click enable. Okay, and for this to work kind of correctly, you're going to need to have set up IntelliJ correctly. Go back to the IntelliJ installation section. And now we want to finally download sample ESLint into the project directory. Okay, so we need to actually provide ESLint with our particular set of rules that we're going to use for this class. So the way I like to do this is to right-click, save link as, and then find the directory, and nicely enough, it's right here. And you could just save as this. And oh dear, I don't think it worked correctly. And when I did it that way, we'll look here. Yeah, that looks bad. So what I can do is I can select this. I can do a propeller shift function F6 to rename it. And now it's named correctly .eslinrc. Okay. Then we're going to create two files, index.html and sumofnumbers.js. And the index.html should load the underscore package. So let's create the index.html. So I can do a propeller n for new, fi for file, and all right, let me just go back because I want the right file type, propeller n, and then I'll go down to HTML file, and I'll say index.html, and I'm going to say yes, add all these files to Git. So I get my index.html file like that, and then I'll go back up to the top, I'll say propeller n, and I want to do a JavaScript file. And that one will be called sumofnumbers.js. And we've got that right like that. Now it says the index.html should load the underscore package available at script blah 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 blah. So we want to have this script tag in there. And that will go here, right in the head. So script blah 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 blah, and then we want to load source equals sum of numbers. And we want to make sure, because we'll be referencing underscore inside sumofnumbers.js, that we load underscore first. That way it's defined. Okay, and then we can see that we don't get any errors that way. So we'll go to sumofnumbers.js, and let's see what we're supposed to do. Okay, write four functions that return the sum of the numbers in a given list, some sample list, using a for loop, a while loop, recursion interval. Call them sum for, sum while. So we'll start with sum for. We're going to use a for loop to sum up the list of numbers. So I want to start by saying, let me create my test list. I'll call that test nums. And that'll be an array of numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And we'll notice right away that we've got some ESLint errors. So if I just mouse over it, I can see what they are. Test nums is assigned a value but never used. That's fine because we're going to eventually use it. And then here we say a space is required after comma. So you have to always have these lists be comma separated. So we'll fix that, and then we'll see that this red squiggly underlines go away. Next thing we're supposed to do is write our for loop, so function sum for, and then we'll take some nums, and how are we going to do this? We'll have a for loop that'll loop through the array, and we're going to kind of increment some local counter. So we'll have to say let total. We have to initialize a local variable that we're going to use to accumulate the total, and then we'll say for const num of nums. This is, you know, kind of an ESLint or an ES6, I believe, for loop thing for iterating through arrays. You can have this for of construct, which is, you know, kind of nice. And what are we going to say? Total plus equals num. Okay. And we need to, let's just see what this says. Total is assigned but never used. So if we say return total, that should go away. Sum for is defined but never used. Test num is assigned but never used. So heck, let's use both of those things right now. So we can say console.log sum for test nums. Okay, and let's see if we got any errors here. Sometimes you have to click on this thing to get it to kind of rerun the inspections. And we get our green check mark. There's some typos because, you know, you can't spell sum for, but it's totally fine. So now we want to run this thing. So we can do a propeller E to switch back to our other buffer. And now we can go to, we can click on the Chrome icon to run this in Chrome. And then if we bring up the inspector, we can see we get 10. All right, so we've successfully implemented the sum for loop. Good for us. The next one is using a while loop. Okay. This is, you know, it's kind of funny. This is like not recommended, right? Why would you ever use a while loop? Why would you ever even use a for loop when you can use underscore? But this is mostly just a test to see whether you can write these, you know, silly things, which, you know, you should be able to write a while loop, right? Now, if we're going to write a while loop and use the same kind of strategy, we're going to want to have our let total equals 0. But because we got a while loop, we're going to need a counter. There's a variety of ways to do this, but the way I would do it is have a counter that's going to be an index into this array, and the counter will increment until we've gone through all the things. So we'll say let I equals 0. That'll be our, I equals 0. That'll be index, and then we'll say while I less than nums.length. Okay, so we'll have a loop, I loop from 0 up to the length of the array, or while it's less than the length of the array, because we have to be 1 less, because it's 0 based. Total plus equal the array sub I. Okay, and then we also need to increment I, right? Because a while loop won't do that for us automatically. And you notice before we had that, it's kind of cool, we had I is never being reassigned. So that's kind of like a little hint, right, that something's wrong. Pretty cool. You know, we have an infinite loop, right, if we didn't increment I. And then finally, total, assigned but never used. So let's return total to get rid of that. And now the only problem is that some while is defined but never used. And I want to have you notice that ESLint, even though it's just kind of a coding standards checker, is actually helping us remember the semantics. You know, it's helping us debug this actual loop expression just by reading the comments and thinking about what they mean. Obviously, it doesn't know that we're writing a loop, but it realized that we declared a variable with let, which means we're thinking that this thing is going to take on a variety of values, but we actually don't have it do that. So super cool, I think. All right, so let's now do a console.log sum while test nums, and let's see if we're good. So we've got the green check. So I can go back over to index.html. I can click this, and now when we run it, we get 2 10s. Okay, so we've finished our second one. Third loop. Third way we want to do this is through recursion. So that'll be kind of fun. So we'll go back to this with a propeller E. And so we're going to say function sum recursion of nums. And how do you do recursion? Well, the basic idea is you need a base case, and then you need your recursive call, right? So what's our base case? The base case is going to be when the array that we pass in, when that array is empty. right? So an arrays.length equals 0. In that case, we want to return 0 because the value of summing up an empty array is 0. Else, what's our recursive condition? The recursive condition is to basically add up the head of the array to the recursive call of the remainder of the array. So the return value in this case would be nums 0 plus, calling the same function again, some recursion, and then we need the rest of the array, and that's using the slice operator of JavaScript in this way. And that's just kind of an idiom, and sometimes you just kind of got to look up JavaScript, get the rest of the array or slice an array or something like that to get the right syntax. Okay, so let's look at our ESLint stuff. Some recursion defined but never used, that's fine. And then it says multiple spaces found before this, so we can get rid of that. And then it says unnecessary else after return. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting comment, which is to say that we don't really need that else clause. Okay, ESLint is saying, look, the way this really should be written should be like that. And we now see that we've got an indentation error, and so we could say propeller option L to reformat our entire buffer and get rid of that, that particular problem. So propeller option L is a really useful way to make sure that your code is indented both correctly with respect to the coding standard, and also that you don't have any extraneous braces in there, and so forth. So now I should go back here and say that we see a little red line here, and we need one new line at the end of the file, so we can get rid of that. So we only have one left, right? If you look here, one error left, and that's the fact that we're not calling some recursion. So I'll just make a copy of that line. And by the way, if you put the cursor on any line and you do propeller C, that makes a copy of the entire line, which you can paste later in IntelliJ. That's a really nice keystroke, by the way. You'll use that a lot. So anyway, so now we're back to the green check. We've got our sum recursion. We'll go back to, with propeller E, go back to index.html. And then we can run this, and we've got 3 10s. That's good. So we're continuing on our merry way. Oh, let me go back here. So we've got the for loop, while loop, recursion, and underscore. The final one is sum the simple way, which is using underscore. Okay, so at last we'll use underscore. And so function sum the simple way nums, and we know we're supposed to use underscore. Well, what are we supposed to do? Let's go take a look at, oops, that's not the one. Let's start up a new one. Underscore. Okay. And what is the best way to use underscore to sum up a set of lists? And if you remember from the functional programming module, it's reduce, okay? And it turns out that not only is reduce tailor-made for summing up the set of numbers in a list, but in fact their sample code is exactly what we need, right? You're going to pass an array of numbers and sum it up. So let's take that sample, go back to our code, and theoretically all we should have to do is replace this, and then we see some other problems. Function missing space, so we'll put in our spaces, and let's see what it says. One error found, which is this. So let's just do a propeller C to make a copy of that line, paste it down here, replace this with sum. And in fact, look at that. IntelliJ actually allows us to, it completes, because it knows what functions are in the file, defined in the file. Okay, so now we've got our for functions. We can go back over here, click in the buffer to get this icon to show up, and we click console. Well, drat, it didn't work. Okay, we got 10, 10, 10, but we got undefined as the value of our last recursive call. So let's go back in here and think about this for a second. Why might our function return undefined? Okay, so stare at the sum the simple way for, for the next 5 seconds. And do you see why it is that that function is returning undefined rather than the sum? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Do you got it? Everybody got it? Raise your hand if you have it. Okay. Got to have a return value, right? Functions don't automatically return their last line. That would be nice, in my opinion. That's the way Lisp does it. But in JavaScript, you have to explicitly declare the return that you want to return a value. So we add that, and then we go back over here to the index.html, and now we get 4 10s, indicating that all is right with the world. Okay, we've written our 4 functions. We check to see ESLint is happy. We're getting the green check mark. So let's go back over to our problem. So we wrote in our 4 functions. They work. There's a green check mark. We have to commit our finished program to GitHub. So I'll go to GitHub, and you can see here that we are committing all of these files. These are all the files that we've actually changed. And you can just commit it this way, but I'm just going to show you, because I'm here, that in general, when you're working with other people, you don't want to commit the sum of numbers.iml or the .idea folder to GitHub, because if some people are working on Unix or Mac and other people are working on Windows, then for reasons that I don't think are great, IDEA can't handle that. Okay, it basically, because some of these files encode absolute path names. So the best approach is to not, I think, is to not commit these files to GitHub. Let everybody have their local copy of these files, but they're not committed when things change, and then everything's fine. So how could we actually do that? The way you do that is you go back to sum of numbers. We do a propeller and file, and we're going to create a file called .ignore. Sorry, .gitignore. And inside that, we're going to say we're going to ignore any file with the extension .iml as well as the .idea directory. Okay? And if we save that and we go back to GitHub desktop, what you see now is that we're going to commit the ESLint.rc, that file, that's good. We're going to commit the index.html and the sum of numbers, that's good. We're going to create our .gitignore file, that's good, because that means when anybody else wants to use this function, this repository, they'll get that same gitignore, so they won't be committing their own IntelliJ IDEA files. That looks good. So what we're going to do now is say, finished exercise. We'll commit it to master. So remember, just going back to the idea, so far, we've just been working in what Git calls the working tree, right? The files that are outside our local repo. So this commit to master means that we've now taken the files that we've been working on in our working tree area and copied them into the Git repository that's associated with that project. That's the files inside the .git subdirectory. Okay, but they're still just local. So the last step we need to do is we need to push the repo from our local area up to GitHub. And that's what this push origin button is going to do for us. So we say pushing to origin. And now it should be up on GitHub. And we want to check that our code is on GitHub. And so the way that I want to kind of indicate that, what I found useful for that is you can see that if you do Shift, and on Mac anyway, it's Propeller Shift G, brings up a browser for the particular repository. So if we say Propeller Shift G, we go immediately to the repo on GitHub, and it's just a little faster. And you can see now that, in fact, all of this stuff plus our README file is now available on GitHub. And I think we're done, right? Stop your timer. 24 minutes for the whole thing. That's a lot. I think we spent at least the last few minutes, so we're going to call it about 20 minutes for RX time. But I think if you talk a little less than I talk, you should be able to get it done a bit quicker.